Hello and welcome to the Arcane Forge. My name's Jess, and recently I've been thinking a lot about magic in D&D and the costs and consequences of casting magic, because I don't know about you, but in 5th edition I feel like those costs are somewhat mitigated. But what if they scarred you? What if their overuse or misuse or repeated exposure changed you fundamentally? Let's talk about spell scars and attunement marks. So while I really love character customization options and the infinite amount of them that we have access to in D&D through just our limitless imaginations, and while I would love to take credit for this very, very original idea, I can't. This is kind of a hybridization between a few different things that I think about quite a lot. The first of which is another artist by the name of Filibuster Frog over on Tumblr, who I would highly recommend going and visiting. A really fascinating artist who thinks about the world building and customization options available to people in D&D, and who has covered things like spell scars before. But also, I'm obsessed with Full Metal Alchemist, the anime. Usually anime is not something that does too much for me. I think like a lot of people, I really like the Studio Ghibli films and stuff, but no anime has really stuck in my head as much as perhaps Ghost in the Shell or Full Metal Alchemist, or specifically Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Full Metal Alchemist is the only TV series that I've ever watched where I was so compelled and so distraught by the ending that I felt compelled to write to the person who wrote it about, could we get more? Could we get something that would make the ending feel, I don't know, more whole? I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I really wanted that. And then when Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood came out, it really reignited my passion for this franchise, and I would say I watched that whole series about once every couple of years. For those unfamiliar, the idea is that alchemy, the preferred version of magic in this world, has a cost, and this cost is like a chemical reaction. One of the things that they go on and on about is that there is an equal exchange. Something of equal value must be taken and substituted in order to create something new. You can't create something out of nothing. And that's kind of something that we do all the time in D&D through magic. I love the idea of old magic having a blood cost or some sort of horrible curse surrounding it, that's why a lot of people don't use it. Black magic, in other words. Dark magic. But if you're willing to pay that price, or if you're willing to find an acceptable, negotiable price or a cost for casting a spell, then those options are available to you. The big point that's made in Full Metal Alchemist is that alchemy used on people, the transformative magic of alchemy used on people, is strictly forbidden, because while transforming lead into gold seems like something that, you could maybe find a way around, what is equally valuable to human life? Surely nothing. Life is the most precious commodity in the universe. So trying to feed a spell with the spell component of human life seems like something that you can never really get back. You can never afford the cost of a spell like that, and that often leaves people with removed organs, removed limbs, or even removed entire bodies in the case of one of the main characters, their soul becoming anchored to a piece of armour forevermore. So with that in mind, I really wanted to think about how casting spells might passively affect your body, how just getting even the slightest bit of miscasting could tear away a piece of you or leave an indelible mark, evidence of your use of this spell, or evidence of a spell being cast at you over time. Perhaps magic isn't perfect, or perhaps the people casting it don't get it absolutely 100% perfect every single time, and over time, this should change you. So, D&D is a journey, and it's best not to come to the table with a fully formed character. The example I always cite is, when you come to the table, don't try and roll up Geralt of Rivia, try and roll up Geralt who's going to go through the Trial of Grasses to become a Witcher. You should hopefully be able to make characters who are okay with things happening to them over time. It's the hero's journey, after all, not just the hero talking about themselves for several hours. I always think about an animated cartoon that I loved called The Tales of Altherion, and in particular, one of their animated adventures called The Journey. It inspired me to tell stories about what's important about D&D to me, the idea that you could start off as a couple of squabbling idiots looking at a treasure map, go through all these grand adventures, only realising that the treasure at the end of all these many years of searching that you embarked on the adventure for was to just become a better version of yourself, a more interesting version, even if that means you've lost a couple of fingers on the way, or become a vampire, or through the passage of time grown distant to people who you once loved, or gained gained new friends along the way. It's super dull to come up with a fully fleshed out character who wears everything that they're going to be wearing by the end of the adventure, and yeah, there are cool stories about those kind of things, those kind of characters. That's not fundamentally how the system of D&D works. You're expected to get magic armor and magic items and trade up and change the things that you use. Your tools and weapons aren't an extension of yourself. You are the amazing thing here, you're the consistent thing, but the other items and things that you acquire change your appearance, change you, change how you operate in ways that you probably couldn't possibly have predicted when you made your character in the first place. And to me, that's the essence of D&D. You end up with something totally different to what you started with, just like the DM writes a massive story and that goes in a wildly different way. You should be expecting to make a character who's going to look and act very different by the end of the journey, in a way that you, as the progenitor of that character, can't possibly predict. To that end, I tend to be pretty loose and fast with the idea of distributing scars. I like to make sure that all of my players around the table are okay with not only character death, but also character dismemberment, character scarring, character disfigurement if necessary, because we're in a world where, yeah, you could use magic to fix some of those things, but maybe you wouldn't. Whenever someone scores a critical hit on your character, or you score a critical hit on somebody else, I tend to say that that will leave a permanent scar if they survive, and there are more damage types than just slashing. Similarly, if you get knocked down to 0 HP, I tend to give you a fairly serious, permanent, or maybe not so permanent, injury for every death save that you fail. You might fail 2 and pass 3 and get back up on your feet, but by the end of all of that, I feel like something that's knocked you down to nothing has probably left its mark on you. Again, whether that could be a whole limb being removed, maybe you're blinded, maybe you've got some sort of scar or something else has happened to you, but I don't think we should trivialize the idea of being knocked unconscious or being wounded in such a way that you can't carry on. Common scars that we see in our world are slashes and things, or burns, because that's what might happen to people in our world, but D&D has magic, and that should cause lasting effects too. Sure, we've got magical fire spells, even spells that summon swords and whirlwinds of sharp things, but what about the more weird stuff that we have access to in D&D? Let's throw slashes and burns out the window, because we know what they look like. They're just in interesting places perhaps, but what else have we got? There's another fantastic artist called Mercenary Tributary on Tumblr who talks about contact with demons and demonic magic causing what they call Faustian burns, a fantastic title that I will definitely be nabbing in my D&D campaigns. These Faustian burns cause black warping flesh distortions, usually with red little eyes inside or what look like them, and this is how new demons are made in this person's own reality. The idea that continued exposure without proper safety equipment might cause this to grow all over you, to consume you, to change you fundamentally, and eventually you become a demon made out of this stuff, but that fundamentally demonic magic is contagious. So what sort of spells might cause this kind of thing to you? Well, I feel like Eldritch Blast for sure, whether that is you continuously being struck with Eldritch Blast, leading these marks to occur all over your body at the impact site, or more often than not, warlocks are the people who use this spell and they use it over and over and over again a lot of times, so maybe gradually over time you develop these Faustian burns on your hands where these spells originate, getting worse and worse the more you use it. Or perhaps you simply develop a gradient of black, inky or purple sort of hues all the way up your skin like a tattoo over continued use with this kind of spell. Similarly, the Arms of Hadar, a spell that summons grotesque tentacles and tendrils to attack people. If they get knocked unconscious by this kind of thing, maybe they have these kind of sucker marks or tentacles of eldritch slime across their bodies, like a purple or otherwise insidious burn that takes the form of tentacles or tendrils across their body, maybe like veins or vines that grow across them, an echo of the spell that they've lived through. Sapping Sting is a fantastically interesting spell that essentially bites someone like a vampire from a distance and causes a torrent of energy to course from that person to yourself, allowing healing, but maybe that makes an impact bite mark like 2 little dots, like a vampire's bite, or perhaps a single impact mark like a sting. Maybe this causes a large bump from that area where blood has erupted out from you, forever changing the landscape of your body. Chill Touch, the confusingly named spell that is neither ice nor a touch-based spell, creates a ghoulish and grotesque necrotic hand out of evil and dark energy to grasp at people at range, and maybe that leaves behind some sort of skeletal imprint, the finger of death itself, having caressed your body. Toll the Dead might do something similar to your ears. Maybe the consistent ringing that you hear, this damage, causes your ears to bleed, your eardrums to become perforated, and once you've long since healed from those injuries, you may still have the marks of black blood having trickled out of your ears as punishment for traipsing between the realms of the land of the living and dead. Or perhaps in a more fanciful kind of way, maybe you resemble more like the face paint that people wear in the Mexican Day of the Dead once you've used this spell so many times on yourself. The idea of feigned death being something that changes your skin with tattoos essentially over time really fascinated me, and it made me think of fairy fire, an often overused, well, or at least frequently used spell. How would something less necrotic but more fey perhaps leave a permanent mark on the spellcaster, or someone who's had this spell used on them a lot? Well, maybe you develop lots of cheeky looking little freckles like a fairy might have, but because of the wild colours that fairy fire causes, maybe each of these freckles iridesce and glow slightly. Maybe they are of peculiar colours that dance across your skin, or maybe change places when you wake up each day, they're in a different place. Detect magic has definitely got to have some sort of visual effect. I don't know about you, but dungeon crawling means that this is an essential spell that comes up all the time, and this could mean that the colour of your eyes change, maybe your sclera's become dark, or some sort of whatever the colour of magic seems to be in your universe. But because it's detect magic and not see magic, maybe you gain a sort of third eye-like mark in the middle of your forehead where your detection comes from, slightly burned in place with arcane energy. What colour would that be? What would that look like? While a slash from a spiritual weapon might make a scar of an interesting colour in the same shape that that weapon might make if it was a mundane tool, perhaps continued use of this spell might cause an imprint or a tattoo or a marking of this weapon to appear somewhere on your body where you might normally sheath it. Once again, think of the Witcher carrying those two swords on his back the entire time. If you use spiritual weapon all the time, maybe a broadsword or a longsword becomes indelibly fused to your back in the form of a tattoo, and various arcane markings surround it, so that when you come to draw this weapon, it simply flashes itself out as something that you can tangibly grab. Blink and Misty Step, two teleportation spells that are frequently used in my campaigns, cause you to dance between realms, become ethereal, jaunt into other planes for a brief time, and maybe a piece of you gets left behind each time. Maybe you start to look more ethereal and more desaturated over time, or maybe you develop something more like vitiligo, where you get these beautiful and interesting patterns, revealing perhaps a starry night sky in their place, or complete pale whiteness against the darkness of your skin, showing literal fragments of you that are left behind when you reform on our plane. Maybe continuously using Alter Self might cause some interesting scars and patterns. Maybe your skin becomes slightly more tangible and shapeable over time. As a trans woman myself, maybe having access to magic that literally lets you essentially press a magic button and look however you want is something that would happen a lot in your games, and maybe that leaves behind certain scars or elements of a magical nature over time. Maybe overuse of counterspell leaves the markings and writings of spell scrolls all across your body until you end up looking like one of the people who resembles the main character from Memento, covered from head to toe in different spells and interesting runes and signatures. Radiant magic is one of those really interesting things to me because it's another form of damage that we just don't see in our world. I mean, unless you want to equate it to radiation, that's definitely available to you, and that could make some really gross and sickening power. But we could also go down a different route. I feel like it's important to not make this just fire, so it just burns, because that's kind of boring, honestly, in a world where you can scar someone with anything. Maybe casting Sacred Flame on someone leaves them with halo-like markings, angelic script burned into their skin, like they've been branded by your deity in particular. And maybe the same thing happens to you if you overuse healing spells. Like Spare the Dying is such a hated spell by DMs because it feels like it has almost no cost. You have to touch someone for sure, yeah, but it also can trivialize combat, so it often gets omitted. But what if instead you took on the deaths of all the people you save with that ability? Maybe your hands that you have to physically touch this person take on the kind of gaunt and zombified shape of the people who would be rotting in a sort of Dorian Gray style way. That's why you cover them with heavy gauntlets, because they look unsightly. Or perhaps in the other capacity, maybe the palm of your hand becomes this glowing, shiny, golden surface, like you've painted it with gold leaf or makeup. And little by little, every person you save leaves some emblem or semblance of their true name spiraling up your arm in an interesting helix-like pattern. And we all know that bless has got to do something, right? Maybe continued use of bless, or having bless continuously cast on you, leaves you with something like a halo branded into your head, maybe the words of your deity, the tenets of your faith, or even something like a Caesar-like crown of plants. Psychic abilities are a really difficult one, but psychic damage is something that we don't take in our world, and I want to represent it in some capacity. In particular, Mind Sliver is a great spell that I think has jumped to the top of every spellcaster's list when they have options for it, because it has great range, high damage, and it's just a really good spell. Maybe a star-like pattern forms on your head when you cast it, and over time this mark gets left in there. In a similar vein, maybe Vicious Mockery and the terrible insults that you hear from it either cause your ears to literally bleed, leaving some sort of psionic energy like scar around your ears forevermore, or maybe hearing those insults is so painfully awkward to hear that you facepalm so hard that you leave a scar-like mark of your own hand over and over again on your face. Detect Thoughts is constantly used, and I think it would be interesting if it had some sort of visual effect, whether that's just your eyes being permanently black, or if there's other sort of interesting markings that could be permanently emblazoned on either the sides or the front of your head that glow thereafter when you cast this spell. Charm Person should definitely have a lasting effect. It's used so frequently in the early game that it might be interesting to make your character look more charming over time. Maybe become more beautiful, or their hair maybe becomes more colourful and fascinating to make them stand out in a room, or maybe their irises get really bright and peculiarly coloured, something that means that they're more likely to be charming in person even when they're not casting the spell, just from its continued use. Maybe your face becomes more symmetrical over time, who knows, but I think that it's so commonly used that it should definitely leave some kind of mark that accumulates over time. Of course, where would we be without Magic Missile? Probably one of the most commonly used spells in the entire game. Maybe you develop a third eye-like space in your head where these three missiles are affiliated, and all three of your eyes have a similar sort of coloration. Maybe they're all purple, the colour of your arcane magic, or something like that. Maybe the markings of the spell circle that you use to cast this are forever ingrained on your forearms, adding a new star-like marking to them every time you learn to channel a new bolt of power out of these things. Maybe you develop constellation-like marks from which these stars of power radiate. Who knows, but I really want to hear your ideas as well. What spells do you use all the time, and what do you think it would do to your body to be affected by them, or to just cast them over and over again? Do you like the idea of permanently having something about your magical nature affect you? Is this something that you're going to use in your campaigns? I certainly hope so. And if it is, make sure to leave that down below in the comment section. I would love to hear your ideas and your thoughts. Maybe if you have a load of your own ideas, we can make a second part to this video, and I can draw some more people who are affected by either casting of or being struck by certain forms of magic. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I absolutely loved getting to think about this and think about how it would help customize characters, how it would shape them over time, how it would send you on a journey. So I hope it's been inspiring, interesting, or anything else. If you did enjoy it, please make sure to like the video, perhaps favorite it, and definitely share it with at least your friend. It'd be amazing if we could grow this channel, and I can really only do that with your help. In the meantime, I hope you make fantastic characters, make some interesting spellcasters, and happy monster hunting. Bye!